Hi everyone. Welcome to the last lecture collaboration, right, Joyee?
Yes.
Oh my God, it's the last of the three between the two of us, between the Malaysian Institute of Art and Concrete Matters. I always keep forgetting to introduce myself, but then I'm Clarissa.
You should today in the third session.
Correct. I'm
Yeah.
Clarissa. I'm a lecturer at the Malaysian Institute of Art. And with me today is also Joyee. We're going to co-moderate the whole session today, which is titled The Stakes of the Unbuilt. The kind of positionality of this talk began from this quote that I found from Daniel M. Abramson, who published in Aggregate, which is an online kind of publication or peer-reviewed journal, which states the unbuilt should not be just a blueprint of the avant-garde, a deterministic temporal glance forward, but rather a critique of the discipline's epistemology in a serious historical interdisciplinary look backwards. So how can we begin to think about these methods of speculation and futurism as a form of reflexive action? It is an opportunity to consider interdisciplinary action, engaging with social and political agendas, and testing with imaginary parameters. So today, the discussion will explore the stakes of the unbuilt, hence the title. Today, we have Michael Chapman, a professor at the University of Newcastle. And we also have Aris Wan, who is Malaysian, but right now based in Cologne in Germany, and also a researcher with INSEAD. Did I say that like that? Correct? At TU Delft, and thinking about the space beyond Earth even. And so yeah, I guess that's how we can begin. I guess we can start with Michael first, since Michael is 10 p.m. right now and it's getting late. So yeah, would that be okay, Michael?
Yeah. Should I share my screen?
Yep,
yes,
you can.
So feel free to share your screen. We'll have half an hour presentation and then half an hour Q&A. So that'll be the format today with a break in between. I keep forgetting to say that. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Can you see that? Yes?
All good.
All good. Thank you. Let's go.
Okay, yeah. No, thank you very much for the invitation. And it's very nice to be talking to students in Malaysia and around the world. And I'm coming from Australia, which is, we're just heading into winter, but it's a very a shifting kind of season for us. And so, yeah, but it's an interesting time of year in Australia this time because we have very clear skies, and our students are roughly halfway through their semester. So it's, yeah, always a really interesting and beautiful time in Australia. And it's very nice to reconnect with Victor, who is one of my precociously talented students from a few years ago, and who is also a really incredibly lovely human being, and generous and kind, and he's also a great dancer, which I know from experience. But yeah, Victor is a person that I think has also kind of introduced me to a lot of things around drawing and thinking and ideas that are sort of influential in my own work. So it's really great to kind of still have that contact with him, even though there's a couple of oceans between us now. But I'll talk a little bit today about my, I guess, journey from being a student into being, well, I guess I'm a professor, but I don't really identify as a professor very often, but certainly an academic, and I also run a practice. But I live in, this is my house, which I'm kind of broadcasting from, which is a really small little house by Australian standards. It's only 3.4 meters wide. And I more or less been living here for on and off for about 20 years now. But I did my final year project in this house. And then when I was renting, and then I ended up purchasing it a year or two later, and then developing some plans, modifying it, renovating it, and now living here. And it's kind of been a backdrop to, I guess, a lot of my thinking around architecture from when I was a student into the real world. And it's sort of a house that has always tried to stimulate me creatively and also challenge me creatively to share more of my life, but also to engage with the world around me. So this is what it looks like from my drone and the little back corridor in the study. And I'm in this sort of middle room at the moment, which I guess is kind of a living room, but it's also the room where I do a lot of my work. This is Rowan on the right, who's one of my PhD students who actually built this little back part with a few of, over the years, there's been a few different people who have kind of contributed to the construction of it, but it's been a really experimental house from the start. And I've always tried to choose aesthetics over program or functionality. So to never make a decision that would be in the interest of functionality, and always to try and challenge myself creatively. And that's been an interesting kind of byproduct or backdrop to my life, because it's kind of seen me, I guess, gravitate a little bit towards academic life, but also to really explore the freedom of academia, which allows me to do quite a lot of work in exhibitions and creativity and drawing. And drawing has really been the kind of datum across all of my work. This is a drawing I did over the summer with Caddy Ross, and I broke my collarbone mountain biking with a colleague in November, about a month before I was doing a relatively major exhibition, and so I couldn't actually draw. And so it saw me kind of exploring machines in our workshop and how I could actually start to learn or teach myself to draw left-handed, and then actually to start to think about my living environment as a way of producing drawings. This is X-Wing, actually, this is X-Wing, you can see him, but who is also my housemate now, and for about 3 years we've shared this environment. And it's also interesting to watch the way that he is starting to learn about being a dog through an environment that is not the ideal environment for a small animal, but one that he's kind of come to enjoy and appreciate himself. So like I'm sort of saying, a lot of my work over the last few years, I've set up a practice with a colleague over about 10 years, Darren Lowe, and we did a lot of houses. But a lot of my recent work has been in the space of the gallery, and it's really been the space of drawing. It's been trying to get drawings to produce a kind of narrative, or to be able to say things that that architecture can't, and to use almost the gallery as a political space, but also as an emotional space, and to try and use architectural drawing not just to communicate buildings, but to start to tell stories. And the last few of my exhibitions have really been looking at, and I guess when COVID happened in Australia, and it was sort of, by global standards, we've been relatively insulated from a lot of things that have happened around the world just because of our island status. But for me, it was a real indication to just slow down and think and stop and actually reflect. And one of the things I started reflecting on was the world beneath me, and geology and coal. And coal is a huge part of Newcastle, where I live, is the biggest coal exporting port in the world. And it's also something that I never really thought about as architecture. So a lot of my work from last year was looking at the coal seams that sit beneath us, and there's about 20 of them, which actually shape the architecture. And I also became really interested in this project, which was to a large extent driven by a studio that I ran last year around Wanji Power Station. And it was taking a building that was in a state of collapse, but was also heritage listed. I was actually finding ways of drawing it, but drawing it in a way that might actually somehow pertain to its future, but also document its current state of collapse. And so these are drawings I did again with Katie and over the summer, which were trying to, I guess, describe this moment of collapse, or this sort of dereliction, or the point where this building starts to express itself through its collapse. And these are both quite large format drawings. These panels are 1.2 by 600, I think, or actually 1.6 by 800, and there's 5 of them. So it's about 4 or 5 meters long. And this one's actually 6 meters long. But the technology is taking drones, and we use drones to scan it to try and provide material that could actually preserve this building digitally. And then we took that material, which is imperfect in its nature, and we use that to kind of construct drawings, and to use the drawing as a kind of bridge between, I guess, what is there and what the kind of reality is, but also, you know, what are the fictional sort of things we can start to read into it. And then we started kind of in a process of just dismantling this building and this idea through the dismantling of the drawing itself. And I guess the other thing that I really love about drawing is its capacity to actually say something, and to say something that is genuine, but also to say something with a voice that, you know, has the same capacity and volume as film and storytelling and songs and music and all of these things. So architecture has always sat in this abstract kind of autonomous space of, you know, the object and form, but I'm interested in the points where it actually steps outside of that and tries to actually tell you something and tell you stories in particular. Why that's not going forward.
Because that page missed you.
But the project that I thought I would start with, I'll show, I think, 3 projects, which is not, and I'll kind of go through them fairly quickly, but this is my final year project. And, you know, a lot of people see the final year project as their last project as a student, but for me, it was very much trying to clarify how I saw architecture and how I saw the world. And so the project was for a prison, and it's for a prison at Luna Park. And Luna Park is a site that sits just underneath the Harbour Bridge. And behind it is a series of very commercial office towers. And in front of it is, you know, amazing views of the Opera House, but also the city of Sydney, which is, you know, a dense, urban, modern city. And so it was trying to position this strange sort of theme park, which had been more or less disused for the last several decades, in a new context. And I guess it's trying to use drawings, and this is actually an interesting period. And it's a really abstract period, I think, for a lot of students, but these drawings were done before we used CAD. So I was using CAD a little bit, but CAD was very primitive. This is 1999 or 2000. And the drawings were actually drawn on a drawing board with ink pens, and then plan printed, and then pencil rendered. And so the time in a drawing like this might be a week. And my final year project, I think I produced 6 drawings, which are all A1, but there's a real investment in the process of drawing. And there's also a process where you can't keep designing up until the end. You've actually got to be making decisions that allow you to produce the drawing. So my scheme was sort of deliberately sitting against this backdrop, or this context of North Sydney, which is very commercial, and it was a prison for white collar prisoners. And so it took the idea of the theme park, which was very much based on consumption and ideas of excess and fun and pleasure, and pairing that against a model of production, and particularly capitalism. And it was a period where I was trying to find a role or a position for myself within the architectural world that wasn't just making money for rich people, and was actually applying, you know, a deeper ethic to what I did. And drawing gave me the freedom to start thinking about that. So this is actually the floor plan. And the floor plan, this project is all about time. So it's actually almost like a clock or a calendar. At the top, you have the gatehouse, which is the process of the prisoner, I guess, removing themselves of all of their possessions and the things that distinguish them in order to become an isolated individual. The point that sits on the cliff there is the courthouse, which takes the form of a submarine, which is a reference to a range of different things in Sydney's history. And the prison itself is a calendar. So there's 26 cells, and every 2 weeks you move from one cell to the next. And so the idea is like the pay cycle, where there's 52 weeks in the year, and every fortnight you get a burst of money that shuffles you to the next week. And the midpoint of that was actually the existing Ferris wheel. So it was positioning itself within the existing kind of landscape of the theme park. And if you look at the section on the right there, it's actually cross-section through a day. So, and I use the kind of classic student technique of putting the text extremely small to avoid any scrutiny from the people that are critiquing me. But every level is actually an hour in the day. And so it's trying to organize the time of the individual by the actual time of the day. And in that, it's sort of referencing a lot of the techniques that were used in prisons in the 19th century. But it's also pairing that against the people behind me that are arriving at 9, leaving at 5, and somehow trying to beat the system. So white collar prisoners are, I guess, prisoners that are somehow trying to step outside of that system of time and shortcut it. And it's trying to put that on display as though everyone within the system is somehow a prisoner. This is just the setup for how I positioned all of the elements, which is actually from the golden section, and it's a kind of Greek kind of proportioning system, an accelerating proportioning system. And the end point there is actually the Ferris wheel. So the halfway point was the existing Ferris wheel, which was a point of reflection where you step outside of this system and you actually start to look back into it and actually start to make decisions around, do you or don't you want to be a part of this world? And I guess in a lot of ways, it was reflecting my own questions around that. If you start, this is the section through the gatehouse. On the right-hand side, the tall section, you have the actual prisoner. Above that is the guard in the sort of house-shaped form. And below that is all of your possessions. And as you move through this system, you are, I guess, somehow stripped of your possessions, but also from a sort of numerological perspective, it sort of simulates the working week. So there's the 5 days of the week, the courthouse, which is the period of judgment, and then the weekend. And for me also at the time, it was in a very subversive way suggesting the 5 years of architectural education, some form of judgment, and then the 2 years of masters, because I was applying for a scholarship to do a master's, which would somehow escape or allow me the freedom not to have to enter a commercial practice and produce highly commercial work. And this is the prison looking backwards. So it's designed to sort of emulate the architecture of a theme park, but it's also placing this notion of the individual and their life on display. And it was doing it in a way that was deliberately questioning production and consumption and the capitalist system and all of the ideas that had existed around it. And so it was also the start of me starting to think about, politics and critique and the way that you might actually do work that can say something without necessarily needing to be built. This is, I guess, some more of the work that has sort of flowed out of that. This is looking at kind of recent work, looking at Piranesi's work, and this is actually from my PhD on the right about architects whose first name is Michael. But it led me into a series of sort of, they're mostly doing competitions. This is one I did with Ksenia Totaeva. It was for a crying room, and it was looking at restaurants, but it was kind of really trying to use drawings again to tell a story and to tell, I guess, a relatively complex story, but doing it through the medium of architectural drawing itself. And so once you understood how this machine worked, and it's a machine for making soup, but it's also a machine that makes you cry, and it makes you cry by using the vapor from onions, and the onions go into the soup and then the vapor goes into your eyes. So it does this kind of twin things, but it's modeled as a kind of living room. And the other work that I did straight after finishing uni with Chris Tucker and Michael Oswald was looking at moments in Newcastle's history. And the city where I live is a city that has always kind of lived in the shadow of Sydney, and is not a kind of celebrated city in Australia, but it's one of the most beautiful and also one of the most important historically. It's the second oldest. It was a really brutal penal colony. It's got an ancient Aboriginal history, but it doesn't really have a narrative in Australian architecture or global architecture. So we were interested in starting to position some of its stories, and particularly some of these forgotten moments in its history, as architecture. These are just projects. This was from the incinerator, which was a building that was demolished in the earthquake in 1989, but had won a series of awards. And it was a project to try and resurrect or just bring attention to some of these buildings that were really a little bit below the radar of, you know, the national and kind of state architectural debates, but were a really big presence in the city. And I was almost saying that if this was a person, you wouldn't just remove it or demolish it when it outlived its usefulness. You would actually find a way to show it some empathy and some care and some love and some nurturing, and you would find a way to incorporate it in the built form of your city. And so I kind of became interested in these sort of ideas of the way that buildings have some sort of emotional content. So this is a project, this was called Dysfunctionalism. And it was a series of projects actually around, mostly around competition entries. And this was a competition for the Pont d'Arc in Paris, but it was really about love. And our project, again, I did work with Ksenia on this, but it was about love and the emotional state of love, but also the bridge that was being replaced was a bridge where American tourists would padlock locks with their initials and name on them and then throw the key into the water. And so it looked at this idea of the lock. And so it looked at, I guess, the river lock, which brings water in. And we thought there was a nice analogy of the sort of overflowing of love and emotion and the continuity and the unpredictability of that with the actual mechanical nature of a lock, which kind of keeps some people in and others out. So this section is actually a section through a lock, but instead of it being powered by springs, which is what a mechanical lock does, it's actually animated by the water from the river. And as the water flows in, it kind of leads to a series of actions that float these champagne bars into place. And then as that sort of progressively happens, they cascade out, and the whole system is in a constant state of emergence and collapse. So it was looking a little bit of the tragedy of love as well. And it also took on these ideas of introversion, extroversion, and, you know, the people of Paris, who, you know, many of them love to celebrate the freedom of their city and the ideas around self-expression. But there's also, you know, a whole section of them are much more private and reserved. And so it kind of oscillates between these two extremes, between wanting to express yourself, but also wanting to retreat. And it uses drawing as a way to kind of describe as much of this as possible. And in the background, there's this sort of abacus-like form, which is actually covered in locks, and it's the bit that actually replaces the bridge itself. It's another little project. This is, again, from a competition. This is for a flamingo visiting centre and a flamingo habitat. But I was interested in, I guess, deeper notions of the flamingo. And there's a lot of kind of relationship between birds and architecture in my work, but the form is actually taken from the Flamingo Hotel, which is from Las Vegas. And it was the setting for Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing, which happens in a hotel room there. And it deals with all sorts of delusions and ideas of collapse and you know, just physical disembodiment. And there's a lot of drug use happening in that part of his life, but also enormous self-doubt. And so I was interested in, I guess, an architecture which doesn't have the same levels of confidence that we expect of sort of modernism, and is actually quite vulnerable and is actually quite lost. And so it sort of, you can sort of just see it here. It spells out the word help in the reflecting pond, and beyond us are all these flamingos, but it's also questioning what's different between us and the flamingo. And it uses, I guess, a series of tropes to try and dismantle your sense of reality, but also to change the way that you might see the world. So instead of looking at a flamingo, you're actually trying to look at the world through the disruption of the flamingo's eyes. And then the renders start to really try and re-engage or reconnect you with the landscape through this notion of Hunter S. Thompson and the very live graphic kind of collapse that occurs in his writing in that period. And the template was in some ways a temple which actually me and Victor and a group of other students visited in must have been about 2016 or something, but in Borobudur in central Java, which is a kind of Buddhist temple, which is based on, I guess, Buddhist cosmology, but it creates this sort of sense of order. And as you sort of move through it and you're exposed to reliefs of the Buddha's kind of story and life, and you kind of gradually progress up these stages, you are slowly being kind of positioned within the world, and you get to a certain platform and you can suddenly see outwards, and you suddenly have this sort of composed sense of where you are. And this project is almost, it's borrowing from that kind of labyrinthine nature of Borobudur, but it's trying to invert it in a way that's actually saying, maybe that journey is actually leading you to more and more confusion and less confidence in the things that you thought you knew. And in some ways, it's a journey of vulnerability and a journey of actually announcing some sense of, or architecture being able to actually start to communicate with not completeness, but incompleteness. This is actually Borobudur, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but it's a really beautiful piece of philosophy, and it's rare that architecture actually engages with philosophy in such a strong way. And so out of that, we've been doing all these renders of flamingos in different yoga poses, which was really starting to think through the notion of the body and the notion of a sort of humanocentric or anthropocentric point of view, which always places the human as the kind of dominant way of seeing, and to challenge that. Another little project, which again, this one's in Newcastle, and it's in a disused bathhouse, which actually sits, so this is the first swimming pool in Newcastle, and it was drawn from water from the ocean. And it was built in the 1880s, and through a series of different things, but it basically was built at a period where it wasn't permissible to swim on the beaches because of the privacy laws and the laws about public decency. So they had these kind of private baths which were gendered, and you had moments when men could use them and women could use them. And there was a lot of scrutiny in Australia at the time, and this was in the 1880s, around the crossover periods and what happens if men and women start to interact in that period where they can cross over. And we thought there would be all sorts of public scandals if that occurred, and the last thing we could do is let that happen. So there was this 15-minute buffer zone when all the men had to leave and all the women could then arrive, and you had a superintendent that would actually police it. And my project was kind of in that space of that 15-minute zone between the men and the women, and it actually started to try and socialize that space. And the analogy that I drew was with the penguin, because the mating habits of Adelie penguins are really quite sweet, because the male penguin basically scours the beach, looks for a rock, presents that to his partner through this kind of quite elaborate dance, and then the partner either accepts it and puts it in the nest and they become life partners, or the partner rejects it and the penguin goes off and tries to find another rock and another partner. But there's very direct kind of biological nature to it, but also a really sort of mechanical aspect to it. So my project was trying to recreate the movement of the Adelie penguin in its dance through shadows in that 15-minute period. So it takes where the sun is in relationship to the swimming pool and actually recreates that dance through shadows. So it leads to this kind of axis, or these kind of four or three axes. One is, well, I think I've probably got a drawing of it. But the first move was to actually empty the pool, remove the building above it, and actually expose this thing to view. And then instead of actually using the pool to collect water, we would collect the water at a higher level. And that became the kind of social level, or the level of the city, or the level of our society. And beneath that were the people that were kind of left out of that, or the people that were somehow rejected from it, or the penguins in this case. It's a little lithograph I did of the four head movements in that sequence, which get recreated. And this was a photograph I discovered of the pool in that period of the 1880s, which basically kind of goes to the heart of the concept, which is that penguins are incredibly awkward when you look at them on land and you look at them kind of walk, and they're trying to navigate these slippery environments. They're always falling over, and the moment they get in the water, it just becomes effortless. but there's this sort of awkward transition between every other state. And they, for whatever reason, have chosen to live a lot of their lives on land. So they're always juggling these eggs, and they're trying to find food, and they're trying to huddle around to keep warm. But they're so natural when they're in the kind of space of the water. So this sort of emptiness, or the sort of the strandedness of land is reversed when you're a human. So you're much more comfortable on land than you are in the water, which is kind of characterized with these very Victorian men standing in this empty swimming pool. But this is my section on the right, which actually starts to dramatize these levels. You can see the pool there, you can see the existing facade, and then this new mechanism above it, which is actually trying to create that kind of dance, or that sort of social interaction between them. And you can see there my original sketches, which show the different head movements. I was interested in Tarani's work, which is this sort of unbuilt work that actually describes Dante's Inferno. So it takes a literary work but actually starts to describe it through its architecture, and whether or not my kind of project could do that. I might gloss through this a little bit, but one of the things that became really interesting was this notion of the space between men and women, and how I might actually start to bridge that. So the axes, and these are like, what you were doing, a kind of structural steel grid of A, B, C, D, but it becomes love in the long plane, emptiness in the side plane, and then time vertically. So love is this kind of dance interaction that's happening between the east-west axis. Emptiness is this process of rejection that happens if that dance doesn't work out, and so that's a downward kind of trajectory to the bottom corner. And time is actually the movement of the sun, because it's actually the marker of time, but it's also the bit that allows these shadows to come into play. This is me just trying to figure out this very kind of complex system. These are kind of coffee stains, but these are the original drawings before I go into the computer. And then this is what it actually looks like, which is quite clumsy in the computer, but you can kind of see even in ArchiCAD, I'm setting up these notions of time, the truss and the interstices, the machine and the pool, and these different levels, which leads to, I guess, a graphic, and then a sketch. And then these are actually the penguin head movements starting to appear as shadows. And it came out of me doing a lot of exploration in axonometric, but actually realizing that axonometric projection, and I was teaching my first years at the time how to draw axonometrics, but I realized it's very similar to the way that you actually create shadows. And if you can project something in axonometric, you can actually reverse project it as a shadow. So the ideas came out of that, of how can we actually create shadows that can tell a story. And then the section through that, which actually each of these has a different volume of music, of water, which was actually tuned to a piece of music. Because I always, at some point, because of that 15-minute time interval, thought that this would be a film rather than a piece of architecture, and that its forum would not be in a built form. It might actually produce some drawings, but the primary idea was to produce an animation. So I did these series of sections after I'd actually modeled it fairly extensively in the computer, and these were all pencil rendered. This was done for a competition in Australia last year, where it was shortlisted. And then this was actually was exhibited as part of an exhibition called Coalface. I'll just show you a little bit of this video. I know I'm probably running a little bit late of time. It's one of the last things I'll show, but it just shows you, and it might lag a little bit because of the Zoom thing, but the way this was kind of conceived and the way it actually finally turned itself into a piece of conceptual art. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this. So this is the male penguin. At the top you see the female penguin. And this is the dance routine. And the rejection. It's a little bit sad, this film, in a kind of dark, quirky kind of way. So the pools get filled by water. Top level is the level of the bath. This is the kind of female engaging with the bath, and we're at the kind of crossover period now. So you start to see the shadows coming to form. this was starting to move to the music. So I had already planned a lot of this as part of the system. Fairly clumsy in the way the stop motion works, but it's actually all done in ArchiCAD by just moving this little bird around and the different elements, and then screenshotting it and then putting it all together. I might leave that there. This is the exhibition. So after kind of finished that, the opportunity to actually work in the space again, because we digitally scanned it originally, but we did an exhibition down there, which was really based on the first surrealist exhibition, where they blacked out all the lights and basically allowed everyone just to visit the work by a torchlight, and we projected the film into the space. And then just hung these drawings on the wall. It was a very closed kind of environment, and just invited a very small number of my close friends. But to kind of encounter this work as though it was actually part of the space, and to see what that actually meant in the process of drawing. So yeah, so it's me really. Well, that's where I'm at the current sort of stage of my work. Happy to kind of answer any questions, and I'm excited to see Arisa's work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for presenting.
Yeah. I think a lot of the ideas and the tools that you use was pretty interesting. This idea of like almost using the drawing as a method of cutting across time as a point of measurement between even like the body and space, or even animals or the creatures that you create throughout your narration. So I think that perhaps we can start with Yvonne's question. It's a little bit intense, but
Do you
I
want
think she's.
Yeah. Sorry.
I think Yvonne, do you want to ask the question, Yvonne, actually? Are you in a space that's able to ask? She's usually in a very loud room.
Yeah. Yvonne, you there? If not, we can read other questions for you. Oh,
Can't
yeah.
speak, very noisy space.
Okay, I'll read out Yvonne's questions. So I suppose Michael's White Collar Prison project is a graphic manifestation of a critique of the current contemporary condition of capitalism. Wow. Using architecture to tell the quite dystopian story. I understand that the manual drawing process is important to Michael, and it took a long time to produce a drawing, so that the design has to be set quite early. However, looking back at the project now, I wonder if there is another version of the project Michael would like to produce and address the condition. Perhaps the current condition, I think.
Is it current condition, Yvonne? That was one thing I wanted to ask before we before we invite you to answer the kind of elaborated. Yeah, current condition. So in this kind of political condition where we're kind of thinking about prisons maybe in a very different light, especially with what's happening in America and globally and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I think it was a project that was, at the time, wasn't really meant to be understood as a prison. It was kind of very much theoretical, using the prison as a kind of allegory for other things. But in the process, I became really interested in prisons, and it was happening at a time in Australia, which is in some ways is very similar to America, but prisons were being privatized. So instead of the government running prisons, you now have prisons where a company would come in and run it, and they would get money to support it. And it's really the first time in the history of prisons when, if you're running a prison, your interest is not in, reforming someone so they don't commit a crime. Your interest is actually more in them going out and committing crimes, because your market is actually in criminals and you make money from crime. So it was the first time, I guess, in the history where the people running prisons weren't directly benefiting from good prisons. They were actually benefiting from poorer prisons. And it was a really interesting period, and it led to a lot of other sort of typologies in Australia around, of just privatizing a lot of these things that the government had normally run. And so I became really interested in those elements of it. But I guess when I look back at the sort of period, and I was, very much a young student, quite frustrated with, well, not frustrated, wanting to do something very social and very ethical with architecture, and not just wanting to do kind of bus stops and things for the public good, but actually starting to really ask some much bigger questions. And I guess if I found anything from it, it was that, your drawing gives you a space of freedom that can exist alongside the everyday. So at the same time as I finished, I started practicing and I started making houses and doing projects for people, but drawings always had this opportunity to allow me to critique things, and whether that's my work environment, or whether that's, emotional states, or whether it's political, I started to see drawing as a different way of expressing yourself in architecture. And it's a skill that we all have. Like, you learn to draw really well in architecture school.
Correct.
But we usually use it, or, like a lot of people never use it again. But if we use it, it's really to communicate to someone that this building is going to look really good. But it's also got a huge capacity in being able to say, maybe the world isn't quite the way that we think it is. And filmmakers are very much in that space, and artists and other creatives have really used the freedom of that. But I think in architecture, it's been a little bit more tentative. So for me, it was the chance to give myself a voice through the drawings, and to be able to say things that I couldn't say in the real world.
Right.
If I allowed to, sorry, just to chip in a question. So since we're touching on drawings, right? My question would be, because nowadays students or even architecture designers use, like you mentioned, using drawings to create another world. They expressing their imagination. It's like a self-expression tool. So how do you actually keep yourself grounded? At the end of the day, when you draw, you express in the imaginative world, it sort of need to have another interfacing with the reality. Like, what is the element that you always use to make sure you come back to the ground, though?
Yeah, I think, well, certainly one of them, because I live in a very small house, and I do most of my drawings in the house, but I have to share the space where I'm doing a drawing with the space where I'm cooking, and the space where I'm making mess and answering emails. And so the thing that I've sort of become very interested in, a lot of the drawings I showed you are kind of the sizes of the tables in my house. So they're 600 by 1200, because that's the size of my coffee table, and it's as big as a drawing I can make. But my drawings kind of get covered in olive oil and, breadcrumbs, and it leaves marks on them, and my life actually starts to work its way into the drawing. And I'm sort of becoming interested in how you might open up to that. And I guess my drawings are almost like a biography now, where they document a part of my life. And, there's something about music that does that, where like a song from 15 years ago, you can remember where you were and what you were doing in that time. And I'm interested in how my drawings can actually start to have that same, how they actually start to record the time when they're produced. But when I look at them as a mass, they all look sort of fairly similar over time, and there's nothing really original, but there's kind of an interesting biographical element to them that keeps them grounded, and also the space of constraint. And then they're almost always produced under time pressure. So I think if I didn't have an exhibition opening or something, you would just keep continually drawing, or you would find it actually hard to draw because there's no pressure to do it. But it kind of creates a moment where you're displaying something in a certain kind of form.
You'll be interested to see the exhibition is actually inside your house, because you draw them inside your house. So it's like the drawings on the table, drawing on the wall, drawing in the kitchen, drawing in the bedroom, etc. And that's the exhibition gallery.
Yeah.
Sorry, Clarissa, back to you.
Oh, that was a really great question, Joyee. But I also wanted to pick up on a little point which Yvonne kind of took up, which was this idea of like having to set the design quite early. And within your presentation, you also mentioned that you also draw to continue or to design at that particular moment. I want to hear a little bit more on how that process happens and how you kind of use the tool of drawing to even help you design, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because when I was at architecture school, I always thought that was like, everything you did was design, and you spend all of your life just designing. And when you go actually out and try and build a house for someone, for instance, and most of my work has been houses, but the design process is, like a really small part of it. And you produce, a series of drawings, normally quite quickly, and then they go to council, and then everything comes back and it changes, and then the budget changes, and the builder changes, and everything is constantly changing. But a large part of your work is actually just trying to preserve the bits that you like about the project. And so what I guess is interesting in terms of the drawings that you might produce is kind of knowing what is helpful and what is just wasteful. And so I used to draw hundreds and hundreds of details of every little element, and you would give that to the builder and they just put lines through them, and you can't afford that, and that's outside of or there'd be council or restrictions. So I'd be trying to draw in a way that allows creativity, but also gets everything that I'm doing or I'm thinking out onto the page. And then I'd be using my drawings to try and protect that. But when I do like a working drawing, it's like a legal document. So I know that if I'm drawing a line on a page there, it's the only mechanism I have to retain the quality of this architecture in any kind of discussion with all of these different forces that are trying to change it. But so I think the exhibition space gives you incredible freedom in that you don't have to worry about the actual, what happens if the budget is half what you think it is going to be, or what happens if you can't find that material and you have to use something else. But it also trains you, I think, to be able to accommodate complexity and all of the different things, because I think the actual creative moment of design is a really small part of it. But the thing that drawing gives you is the ability to actually realize design and to realize, to take your design to a really detailed level and to actually really produce amazing things. Drawing gives you the capacity to do that, I think.
Great. I think that leads to my question, which is this idea of the underlying humor that seems to be present and not really talked about so much, which is maybe the whole point. I'm interested in how you weave that into your work, and also perhaps even to integrate it more into our discipline. Maybe it's not only this idea of humor, maybe it's also this idea of emotion. And also, we're often too serious.
I find Michael works is very interesting. In a way, it's very thematic, very cinematic in a way, very dramatic. When you have the penguin meetings together with the time, the shadow that looks like a penguin head, I just feel like everything looks like a movie.
Yeah, no, I think that's relatively recent in my work, and it probably came out a lot of just having people in my life who weren't architects and realizing, when I started studying architecture, before I started studying architecture, I had lots of friends who weren't architects, and as soon as I started studying architecture, everyone in my life was an architect. And you didn't even really become aware of it, but every conversation you have is either about architecture or it's with someone who is studying or aware of architecture. And when you realize there's these creative people out there who aren't architects, and they're as interesting as we are, but they're also when you try and explain to them what you're doing in architecture, they find it really boring, and you actually, when you try and understand what they're doing in filmmaking or something, or in art, it's really interesting. And so I think for me, the way that architects communicate with the world that isn't architects is really underappreciated, and yeah, like I think some of that is in exhibitions and or in public forums, but I think architecture has always had this very abstract quality, and so I became very conscious of wanting to be much more direct in what I said, and to be able to do drawings that my mother could look at and understand, and not see it as some very technical, like this is a drawing of a spaceship or something, but this is actually
something
a building that could
comprehensible.
exist in the world, or it's telling me a story, and I don't need to have a degree in order to understand the conversation, because I think that's what, like I think the really good films and animations and things that you see, they're really good at just being able to reach people and actually touch them, even if they're not designed for you particularly. You can actually see something in them, and so I think that's been something that I guess, and I guess I've also hidden behind that very academic kind of facade for quite a long time, writing very academic papers that only really academics read, and they're sort of very theoretical, and they're,
I feel you.
yeah. But there's something about exposing yourself a little bit more openly, and then being a little bit more vulnerable, and
Right.
that is very challenging, and I don't think it's natural to us as architects, because
That's
we're always
true.
very trying to resolve, and we're very often perfectionists, and we're very minimalist, and but we don't want to reveal the way we do things, and but when we do it, it's really interesting to architects and also people. And actually, I was talking to it might have been Kat, or that we were having a conversation with someone about the number of people in drawing who do amazing drawings, and look at Levius Woods or these people, but they don't ever reveal their process or their sketches, or what's going on before all they ever reveal is the drawing as a finished thing. In some ways, the most interesting part is how they
It's the
actually
process.
get there. Especially if you're a student or you're someone trying to learn from this. It's
The trial and error part.
yeah.
I think that leads really swiftly on to perhaps the last question. Is that Joyee?
The TV.
TB.
Yeah. Hi, T. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Hello.
All right. It's okay. Then we'll ask on behalf of you then. So TV asked a question in the group chat. Your drawings and stop motion make obvious the labor involved in their productions. And by extension, the design process is a form of labor in your imaginary projects, which are not driven by finance, seems instead to be an emotional labor, especially given the autographical and metaphorical aspect of your work. Can you talk how you see the function of drawing as a process? That's from
yeah, I mean, I certainly, I think that, drawing is one of those things that is very, very labor intensive, and there are lots of ways you can speed it up, but I think doing it in a way that is very labor intensive is actually the joy of it. And so every time I do a drawing that, and some of them take weeks, and some of them, but I always think, it's like, why haven't I been doing more of this? And I guess for me, it's like my life in particular I spend a lot of time sending emails that don't really need to be sent, and reading emails that are really largely irrelevant. Like, car park number 3 is going to be closed from 10 till 12, and or the water's going to be shut off in this building on the other side of campus for half an hour, and there's all this information in the world now, but most of it is irrelevant. And sometimes I come home and think, what have I actually done today? But when you make a drawing, and there's sort of a pointlessness about drawing as well, in that it doesn't necessarily have a productive function, but there's something about just spending your time doing something and investing in it and expressing yourself and doing it with care and love and empathy and
Almost like an act of meditation, right?
yeah, exactly.
Therapeutic.
It's very meditative and it's really rewarding because at the end of it, there's a drawing. It's not just like an empty sort of space. So I think it's kind of it doesn't surprise me that it's becoming more popular around the world again, or that people are reconnecting with drawing, because I think it has a lot of things in terms of being able to describe and articulate, but to put your time into something that actually has value and some benefit.
Nice. Thank you. Hope that answered your question, TV. Yeah.
TV put thumbs up.
So I guess to wrap up the session, I was wondering, Harif Hassan, who is a student of Michael, do you have anything you want to add on to Michael? So answer something. Since you're a big fan of his work you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I should put in a question, so I'll just read it out.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for showing the project, your uni project, Michael. I think that's one of the only projects I haven't seen from you. And I thought it was interesting because this is metaphoric and seemed allegorical. But I think in our studio, even though it's not overtly said, we should do something pragmatic and something that's realized. Were there like key points or principles or a framework that allowed you to pull off a successful allegorical work for your final work?
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when I did final year, it was a very different kind of regime in a lot of ways, in that it was highly pragmatic and I think there's a value in that. I do think that constraint creates better architecture in a lot of cases, and that you don't just sort of change projects or sites or like that. Actually, architecture teaches you to actually work through a problem and to use your process in order to solve that problem. But like a lot of the way that I presented my project today is quite different to how I presented it when I was a student. And when I was a student, it was presented as a place for reforming prisoners. And I didn't present it as a critique of capitalism. I'm sure I wouldn't have ever mentioned any of the numerological aspects or any of the, so I would have presented it at a level to an audience that were looking to understand it in a certain kind of way. And I guess the thing with an allegory, if you think of George Orwell's wrote a book called Animal Farm, and it appears like a series of animals living in a farm, and they have a revolution, they overthrow the humans, and then they start to develop this kind of system of, well, what effectively is communism. But it seems like a really harmless story, but when you actually realize what's being said, it's actually a critique of the Soviet revolution, and so it goes from the animals overthrowing the humans to just behaving like humans and becoming the thing that they said they wouldn't be. But it's never expressed, and it's only when somebody points that out to you that you realize, okay, this is actually a historical piece of work. And I've always liked, I've always liked drawings or work that allows me to understand it in that level. So it allows multiple levels of interpretation where someone isn't explaining directly what it's about and you have to actually find it out for yourself. But also the moment when you actually learn that, you can apply it to other kind of forms of architecture and learning and various things. So I've always had an interest in that subversive element, and the work that I did with Darren also has a very similar way of thinking. So there's always, in a lot of the houses we did, there's details which solve a problem in a really beautiful way, but they're also maybe saying something about surgery, or they're saying something about submarines, or they're saying there's always a message there that isn't explained to you, and we generally make it a point not to explain, but that allows architecture to carry this extra layer of meaning. And so my advice there is that you always kind of design a project to solve a certain problem, meet a set of criteria, and to, you know, satisfy the functions of the project, and to be able to understood at that level. But also it can carry these much greater levels of meaning and layers of meaning, and that is very satisfying to me. And I guess until I started saying things more directly, like in the Penguins project, a lot of that stayed buried in the project. So I would never, you know, the buildings would never speak directly. But once I started kind of, giving the buildings a bit more of a voice, or the building, you know, kind of spelling out words or having voice bubbles saying that, you know, this is not right or whatever, then it kind of opens up for people that, okay, maybe there's something being said here that is not everything that's being presented.
Great. Thank you.
Hope that answers your question,
Thanks,
Harry.
No, definitely. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Right. So I guess it wraps up the first session of sharing. Thank you so much, Professor Michael. So we'll take about a 5 minutes break, and then we'll continue with the second section in 9:15. All right, guys. Thank you. Do have some water break, toilet break, or you have any more questions for Michael? And hopefully Michael is off. I mean, who else have any quick questions? And then you can perhaps drop Michael a question here, or email him if you're interested for future collaborations, maybe drawing.
I'll drop your links in the chat box. Your Instagram?
Yeah.
Would that be
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, I can share as well.
Yeah, go for it. Cool. Thank you, Michael.
Are you tired? It's already 11, is it? Oh.
You're muted, by the way.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, I saw there's a question from Victor there.
Yeah.
About the pandemic, which is quite interesting. Because
Maybe for you two to catch up.
Hi, Victor.
Hello.
How are you today?
Michael?
Hey, Vic, how you going?
Bye, yeah.
Wow, you're looking fit.
Fit, come on. I'm picking out right now with the satay.
Yeah, good. Yeah, no, it's good to see you.
Good to you too.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you for agreeing to share it with us, your work.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I saw you have some conference paper on the research gate. Do you mind to share it here as well?
On what?
Research gate. I just shared. I found it.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of my work. Oh, I don't deliberately have my work up there, but yeah, most of my papers are up there.
Yeah.
But I wrote a lot of conference papers and journal papers. Yeah, just as in Australia as an academic, you're just producing lots of publications in the early years. But it's a good kind of, the majority of them are about either surrealism or drawing. And there's some really, like Douglas Darden and Levius Wood.
Dali.
Yeah, they're really good precedents for students to know about. But
I wonder, do you draw a line between, or do you intend to draw a line between art and architecture? Like, because when you draw the drawings, like they are more towards the art aspects, or no?
Yeah, it's like I'm actually working or employing an artist at the moment who works for me on drawing projects, and it's just interesting. And she studied architecture she did the bachelor degree, but she was a trained artist, and it's interesting how differently they see the world, but also that, I'm very conscious that my work sits within architecture, and I don't feel like I would have any credibility as an artist. Even though like I've done a lot of work in exhibitions and galleries and through drawing, but I see it as architectural drawing. I don't see it as presenting itself as artists.
Right, it's not like an art practice that you...
Yeah, no, I mean, I would love to have one, but I don't feel like I have much credibility in that space.
Interesting.
That I operate within architecture, and I'm trying to say things about architecture, but it's really interesting to collaborate with people that are in that space, and the freedom of it is really appealing to me. Particularly the kind of they have a much stronger awareness of what a gallery means, and
Correct.
and what the work means, and even the drawings have a different kind of purpose, I think. So
exactly.
Hopefully we get to visit the gallery in Australia one day.
Well, we're doing an exhibition next month, but
Awesome.
there's a lot of really amazing art happens in Australia, but also in Malaysia as well. But Australia has a really strong, Newcastle in particular, has a very vibrant art communities.
Looking forward.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. I think we have our tolerance ended, so we would like to resume with our second session. So here you go, Aris 1, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Michael, for the beautiful presentation. I really enjoyed it. Love the penguins.
And the very romantic background music.
Yeah, amazing story.
Okay, you may begin.
So let's begin. Oh, sorry. Okay. Can you all see all the screen?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So I'll start. So my name is Aris 1. I'm a Malaysian, but currently based in Germany. So really thank you for the invitation, and really nice to meet you all, inspiring students, and Michael. And today's project is about a project Mars House. It's about Beyond Earth. So I'm a very futuristic kind of person, and I always inspired, since I was a little girl, I was inspired by all the science fiction movie, Blade Runner, or Gattaca, or Star Wars. I was amazed by their architecture styles and how they see the future, So yeah, I was an illustrator since I was very young. So I started drawing when I was 5. So till now, I still draw. So I started with the manga illustration. So pretty interesting background there. So I'm very into also Japanese art somehow. Also like the Gundam Wing or all this Studio Ghibli kind of style. So as you can see after my presentation, along my presentation, all the style will be a little bit like a Japanese illustration, like a manga style. So somehow I'm trying to blend, trying to make more fun architectural illustration. So I'm trying to blend manga illustration and also architecture world together. So yeah, but I would like to share my master thesis. My master thesis is Project Mars House. All my supervisors and lecturers are from TU Delft. So very thankful to them somehow. Dr. Henrietta Beer, Sina Mustafawi, and Angela Romulan. They are all very professionals, lecturer, and inspire me a lot in the work. So the location is on Mars somehow. So as you see nowadays, and it's not just Earth, and humans are trying to explore beyond Earth, I would say. Why not throughout our journey? So we all humans are naturally explorers. So throughout these years, NASA or European Space Agency or other space agency, have found out a lot of content evidence to support life in on Mars. And then I see the opportunity on doing such a project. So as you can see in this rendering, is a sort of an inflatable structure. Yeah, inflatable structure gives a lot of potential for compact architecture. So this is also the future of space architecture somehow. I see potential. So in this project is talking about also a bit of biomimicry, inspiration. So yeah, and also robotic production. So I would like to share about the concept of this project. So current system of the space station, as you see in the first graphic in the left here. So you can see our current situation of our space station. So if we want to talk about exploring to outer space or further beyond, we can't allow astronauts to live environment like that. So we need to think of a new solution. So this is kind of chaotic for a long-term mission. Let's say it's 7 months or 8 months to Mars. So this is not a good solution if we want to explore more into space. So I have a big question: if what if we can look into the nature itself? So I'm pretty inspired from the system of a vascular system from a natural world, Plantia kingdom, which is trees and leaves and all this natural habitation species. So as you can see in the right hand side, on your right is a two kind of circulatory system or vascular system. So the first one is humans. Human circulatory system is very heavy and somehow not kind of efficient, but still very sophisticated. We humans have arteries, have heart, have veins and lungs, and it builds up a lot of all this weight. So imagine you see the system of a tree, a transpiration system. They are so smart in terms of running through their whole body. So if you see a piece of leaf, just one piece of single beautiful leaf, it can, in such a thin surface, it can do 5 complicated process, transpiration, or photosynthesis, osmosis. So I was pretty much inspired from a piece of leaf, where we call it's like how to say, yeah, fractal system. And then before diving into design or architectural process, you also must understand the basics or Mars data. So all the data I collected here is from open source from NASA and European Space Agency. So it's a very fruitful and supportive data from a project. Yeah, the location, you also must understand pretty well the whole location of Mars and the whole mapping of Mars itself. So I was very privileged to have a supervisor, which is actually a commander from NASA, High Seas mission. If you heard about this, it's a simulation in the Hawaii volcanic area. So Angelo Vermeulen is my third supervisor for this project. So he gave a lot of practical insights and a lot of real time mission, and also he shared about how astronauts will work in the future of a Mars mission. As you can see in the right corner, there is a high seas daily schedule. So later on, it actually inspired how I created space. So this is the current situation, like what NASA provided architecture space for the astronauts. So I really see there's a room for improvement in the future. So yeah, there's much more to improve. So So here is my project in a 3D isometric form. So Mars is like Earth, so you actually really have to understand how the Mars habitat or location works. So even Mars have their own season. So the location that I choose is Valles Marineris, which is the equator of Mars. There's a reason why I choose because it offers glimpse into Mars geologic and hydrologic past, and it's also how to say provide liquid water in the canyon. So selection of a location is also very important while you're building any architecture in the beginning. So I selected a much more normal base, or the equator of Mars is much more reflected to the seasons or the weather of on Earth. Somehow it's more similar. So it's not so extreme, but it's still extreme. So as you can see in the first diagram is, or the first illustration is uninflatable combined module undeployed. So the second one is a deployed module. As you can see, the inflatable structure is inflated. And the third illustration in the far right is a section of how it operates in the interior spaces. So yeah, it actually maximizes the spaces. So companies like, I also did a lot of research into companies like Bigelow, all this US, United States company, Lockheed Martin. You can see all these very sophisticated scientists and architects there. So yeah. So I told you guys, I also an illustrator. So for me, a human form or human ergonomics are very important. How do we deal with architecture? Because without human form, or without understanding the human body, architecture cannot form beautifully. So I also very inspired by Leonardo da Vinci. All my work, he's my like a dead man teacher. I have a lot of books about him. So according to Vitruvius, also Da Vinci is inspired by Vitruvius. The architect's design must refer to the unquestionable perfect of the body, symmetry, and proportion. Yeah, so yeah. While Leonardo da Vinci believed the workings of the human body to be an analogy of the workings of the universe. So this is a very inspiring sentence for me to continue my project. So after understanding how human body or ergonomic works, so later on you can design specifically for astronauts or any architecture element. But especially space architecture. Space architecture is pretty compact. There's no much space you can design. So you really have to think about how body works, how specific space you need. So yeah, space architecture is much more about compact space and how much material to save in your design. So in this illustration is hand sketches by me. So I usually will sketch any design first before I go into 3D. So this is my process of working. So this is my initial sketch that I will show to my lecturer. So in this sketch is showing about a VR technology that you can use throughout, say, 7 months journey to Mars. I saw the potential in VR technology because if we are about to travel to Mars, 7 months in a compact space will make a person crazy, or psychologically it's not healthy for astronauts. So we somehow, or I see opportunity in VR technology. So in this illustration is showing a human sleeping, and somehow with this neurological technology or VR technology that the human can use. This technology is actually also, I was working along with some scientists in UK, United Kingdom. So they are actually producing a device that could connect to the brain or hack the brain. It's called MindFlow. So recently we won the pitch for some research work to be developed into the real market. So it's going real somehow in some point. In the right hand side is showing how a smart membrane, like inflatable structure, smart membrane can work ergonomically with the human body. Yeah, it's pretty much about membranes and compact space and smart material, would say, in this project. So besides architecture, I also offer a one set kind of design. So the first one is a smart membrane, the second one is a smart suit, and the third one is a biological spacesuit. So it comes together in one material. So I also work with my colleague or former students or former classmates in TU Delft. Currently, he's a researcher in ETH Zurich in Switzerland. So he actually invited me to design something because he's doing a research in a smart materials. So I believe smart materials can change the world. How do we look at the little world? And I believe if we able to change how we see materials, I think how do we see architecture in the future might be also a big revolution. Yeah, so in this sense, he's doing some 3D printing and also like a combined printing with the soft material and hard material. So he actually invited me to illustrate something with the 3D printing, like a hard and soft material. So somehow in this drawing, it shows both. Yeah. But yeah, I also somehow about the inflatable structure. So how do we do more, how to say, more intricate, more structure to support this inflatable element? So I actually inspired by a signature of Buckminster Fuller. He's the father of founding of geodesic structure. As you know, the lightweight structure in a very big piece of glasses. So he actually explained how can geometric structure concept work. So I inspired by his book and his philosophy. So triangle is the most stable and more, how to say, it's supported by itself in the three edges and using less effort to somehow support the whole structure. So in this design, it's pretty much a triangulation somehow to also to enhance the engineering kind of view in this inflatable structure. So as you can see, there's two elements. So the first one is the triangle, and the second one is the node, the controllable node. And then third one, from triangle tessellation, it forms a tetrahedron. Tetrahedron is also a very strong form of, strong geometry. So as you can see, this is like a combined module, and it's also a modular design in how this inflatable structure can adapt to the Great Canyon on Mars. So it's yeah. And this is a membrane, and I also do a lot of grasshopper work, so parametric. So as you can see in the far left is a simulation of inflatable structure with the pressure and the possibility of controlling the smart nodes. So the second image from the left is about a section. How would the inflatable structure architecture work? So it works in a 3-layer system. So it's not just architecture itself. I also have to understand how the science behind the architecture it works. Like because the pressure on Mars is different, the weather is different, the gravity is different. So it's really interesting that it forms a different kind of way or view in terms of architecture. So I also must understand the pressure and atmosphere. So somehow you can see a 1 meter gap at least to filter the high rays because on Mars there's no atmosphere. So as you're talking about building on Mars, and the radiation rate is super high, so it can burn people. So you must always consider a layer of protection in your architecture itself. So in this sense, I use water. So as scientifically proven, you can check out in the far left, there's a link. Scientifically proven water can reflect or retract radiation itself. So there's a layer of water layer in the outer shell. So the third image is showing how the matrix works and how the layering system works. So I can say there's 3 main layer. So exterior layer is mainly developed with ETFE, the strongest material you can get recently. So the second layer is the waterways. So waters are really crucial in outer space architecture. So the second layer is all about how do we conduct water throughout the overall space. And the third one is a thermal system, and the interior layer will be the fourth one. So the last image in the right will be a design parameters layers. As you can see, in this texture, it's pretty much inspired from the vascular system of the leaf. So I'm trying to play around with the equation of a kind of in the fractal system. So there's a code for developing a fractal system in Grasshopper. So you actually can play around and explore how vascular system works. So in this sense, I formed this pattern in some point for some reason. And further on, I also do some hands-on experiments to see whether or it is really working. So as you can see in the far left is just a laser cutting material that I did. So it's a tessellation, or you can say it's inspired from origami tessellation. So somehow I just do a simple 2D laser cutting and then form a form. And then the second process, I jump into 3D printing. So as you can see in the left second image, it's about you form the form in Grasshopper, Rhino, and then you somehow 3D print it into a real product and see how it works. Somehow it works at some point. So the third one in the left is a robotic production. So I say in our studio is a bit more advanced. It's not talking about just architecture. In my studio, it's about also production and also overlaying with the technologies currently that we can get. So in Europe, it's like a robotic party right now. So everyone is pretty much looking into how AI could support architecture, or how robotic system can support architecture. So in the far Right. Yes, it's a end product of the design I made with my classmate in lecture. So you can see how robotic production can produce. This is produced in 30 minutes once you have a code. So you can produce just by sliding the parameters, you create a different pattern somehow. So robotic architecture is pretty potential for future architecture. So for that, I would like to show a video about, sorry for the weird. So this is a video about the simulation. I hope you can see the video without lagging. So
It was great. It wasn't lagging. It's great.
okay, thank you. So I will go back to my presentation. So yeah, that will be end of this project. But after I graduate, yeah, I was privileged to invited by Professor Angelo again and Henrietta Beer to be a guest researcher in TU Delft, and also a member of SIT. Yeah, both of this professional that I'm working for is related to space or space architecture, I would say. So in this project, I was invited by Professor Angelo after I graduate. It's designing for a Starship interstellar mission in the far future, I would say. So it's an evolving asteroid starship. Somehow it's a design that we built on a starship. So built on an asteroid. Sorry, asteroid is as we know, it's a very rich mineral kind of element on space. So it's a very potential for future space architecture to be part of it. So in this biggest contribution in this project is if we want to talk about interstellar mission, we can't rely on machine in this 1 light years or 100 million years if you say you want to travel to another stars. So you cannot blindly rely on machines to live or to support the ecosystem. So me and my professor are thinking, how do we grow trees in space actually? So this is one of my biggest contribution from my side. It's a invention of growing trees in zero gravity that can implement in space station. So you can see in this sketch, it's a hand sketch. It's a kind of an anchor system in a zero gravity kind of environment. So you can see there's a smart membrane here. And actually it's like a layer of a soil or some layer that a person can lie on. and or lay on, sorry. And this is as you can see, the blue pipes are to support some water or to pump up some water for the trees. And then the red cable will be supporting the trees from floating all around into zero gravity space. So in the right illustration, it's besides of that, we also have this module in this evolving starship, evolving asteroid starship. So we have this module in a different kind of space configuration or architecture. So module 1 and 2 is supporting crops unit. And then the module 3 is the garden unit, and module 4 is a Melissa unit. Melissa is a kind of a system invented by European Space Agency. It's a system to support astronauts to live in outer space. So yeah, that's a knowledge, if you know. So the last project that I want to share is Engines of Eternity. This is my current project or ongoing project right now with Dr. Angelo, and he are commissioned by scientists from Belgium. So in this project is talking about poetically is talking about human evolution in culture. So somehow it related to this rotifier, as this professor or scientist from Belgium, Dr. Karin, he actually found out a little organism called rotifier. As you can see in this far right corner picture, it's a tiny organism can actually regenerate itself in an extreme environment. So she's pretty inspired by that. And then after that, she was commissioned by the European Space Agency and NASA to send this little creature up to space, up to the International Space Station. So we have 3 journeys. So we already sent, our team is it's already sent two times launch. The last, the current launch is with SpaceX during the around March. So it's launched in the three terms. So we are waiting for the next 3rd launch. So, okay, we launched this little guy to the space, and then we somehow, the scientists in the International Space Station need to do some experiment. Somehow they will send the data back to us, the designers or architecture, you can say. What Professor Karin actually wanted to share is, as her philosophy is saying, scientists is always doing their work in just the laboratory or just in their own space. So Professor or Dr. Karin are interested to show the result to the public itself. So that's how we get involved in this project. So we actually collect the data from the scientists in the International Space Station. So we need to use this data from, actually is from the rotifier. So they need to make an experiment with this little guy, and somehow it will regenerate. Like somehow the scientists need to check the DNA system of this little guy somehow, this rotifier. So to see what's changing inside of the DNA, and from this DNA record is actually recorded in a kind of a Python system or some code, you can see, you can say, and the code will be sent back to us, and then we actually have to generate illustration or a parametric form. So my current contribution in this project, as you can see in this big illustration, is pretty alien somehow, and a bit of poetic I wanted to contribute or to share. So it's a kind of a DNA structure, and it's somehow morphing, and it form, and it somehow morph into a like a eternity. Yeah. So the concept of morphing the DNA data somehow. Yeah. I guess that's it for my part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aries.
Sorry for such a lot of information.
Well, I guess a lot of information is good. Great sharing.
Too many. Yeah, it's not just architecture. In my work, it's also related somehow collaborate with the transdisciplinary scientists or engineers, or yeah.
Yeah, that actually relates back to sorry, Clarissa, you want to say anything first beforehand?
No, I was just interested in this idea of the transdisciplinary, because that's what
Yeah.
the stakes of the Unbuilt is kind of positioned as this whole talk, right?
I was wondering, like, first and foremost, I think we have a few questions in the group chat, but before we go into that, I was wondering, what the knowledge of architecture doesn't really much imply here, or like how does I don't know how to phrase my question. Can I just ask Queenie's question? Queenie, you want to ask the question?
Yeah, like I was very impressed in your first project, right? How it stands for an seemingly artistic approach, and then it develops itself and grounds itself upon a lot of scientific understanding and research. So I'm curious about how it is after you graduate, because I assume like before you graduate, it's still supposed to be an architectural project, right? But then after you graduate, you're working with this team in Tilda, which are multidisciplinary. So I'm curious about what disciplines they are from, and how does an architect play a role within this multidisciplinary team?
Thank you, Queenie, for a good question. So it's a challenge somehow for me in the beginning. So there's a lot of different, I was privileged to work with a lot of different professionals, like astronauts, or how to say, aviation, or a lot of biological scientists. Yeah, somehow it's a struggle because they couldn't see how artistic mind can work. But somehow in communication, it's a kind of skill that you have to talk in this sense. So you have to really convince the other professionals to buy your idea. Somehow communication skills is play a big part of role. So because you cannot really picture, like in the more scientific research background, they can't really picture how it works, how the illustration would works. All they know is calculation. So you really have to communicate very good and show, as my advantage, I can sketch, and I can sketch in a very fast way. So I always sketch and then just show my team that yes, this is a design that I wanted to convey, and I will answer, why did I do this? Why did I do this? And they will say, oh, sometimes they will not agree. Sometimes they will agree. Yeah, communication skills are very important in my part role.
Sorry, may I add on a question? So because I think the question I want to ask earlier was actually similar to Queenie, because in your presentation, they are very good. I mean, it's very scientific and technical as well. So in a way, like you mentioned, that they know all these calculations, all this science fact behind, they are more likely the architect of the habitable space than us, you know, because we are using our current building knowledge to design something that we don't know the context, what is the context is. So how because our aesthetics no longer an important factor in this sense, in this design. So how does our role as an architect to help to design for this outer space? That's my question as well.
Oh, okay. A very simple way is to listen, because we architects don't know everything. So let's just be humble and listen to other professionals. Listening is the key to understand how do we work later. So each of the professional would speak out their kind of meaning or their mindful thoughts.
Understanding their knowledge.
Yeah, you have to really take part of them and blend into this one. As my role, I have to blend every part of the commentary. Yeah, so it's a challenge.
Nice.
But it worked somehow in the end. Yeah.
That's nice to know.
Thank you.
Hope that answer your question, Queenie. Yeah. Maybe we shall move on to the second question. Gary, you asked something about the new ecosystem. You want to unmute yourself?
Biomimicry on Earth and applying it over.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Gary here, and hi Ivanka.
Hi Ivanka.
But anyway, the question I would like to ask, because for me biomimicry is a whole process, and it reminds me of Darwin saying that nature doesn't make a jump, and it's very interesting. It takes a long time, and then what Iris proposed here is quite interesting as well, because we definitely have to take somewhere, the knowledge from somewhere. So definitely in this case is Earth. I just wonder what's Iris' thought in this case, where have you ever envisioned in a way that what's next on this kind of a biomimicry design, if after we adapt into Mars climate or Mars landscape or things, so this gonna be the next step, because what I see Iris doing now is the first step, like before Mars colonization, and sort of like the starting point. And I thought that it would be more interesting to could know more about like what's next, the evolution of after settle down in Mars. Yeah. And especially it comes to natural ecosystem, it's kind of unpredictable, it's like technically you are designing a species kind of thing. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Agree with you.
Okay.
I think Gary was asking a question though.
Okay.
Hey Gary,
So-
you fail in asking question.
Sorry, it's a lot of good commentary. So the question is, yeah, the point.
I'm sorry, but
No problem.
but yeah, I just really thought have you ever thought of thinking of that in a way to designing species, no longer design architecture? You are designing human body or designing animals kind of thing.
Yeah. Because for me, architecture itself is pretty vast and broad.
Yeah.
For me, a single piece of leaf is also architecture itself, architecture from the heavens. So I see architecture in a broader way, not just buildings. So in the future, it might happen. So like this COVID situation actually inspired me to design something with the human body itself, because right now we have this social distancing. So I was thinking recently about what if the architecture itself, it can like a inflatable structure in our body. If you can see in some this famous artwork, I could share later, but I forget the artist's name. But it's showing how the future works. He's sort of illustrate every human have their own space somehow. So the body itself is a very inspiring element. So yeah, I see potential in every form. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I reminds me of a Malaysian artist called Chong Yen, but he's designing more on game, based on games. And it's very interesting. He actually designing animals and animation. Another one is actually a Netflix show, and then they actually envision like what's the animal gonna be in the past or in the future. That's very interesting as well. So yeah, thanks a lot for the sharing.
No problem. But I like the question that you asked. Yeah, I also see, as you see how technology can work right now, how robotic technology can provide such a intricate detail and such a sophisticated material they can create. So I was saying, I was thinking like architecture itself, it can also evolve in a biological body. Like I was recently thinking like a body of elephant. Let's say they are pretty big somehow. So what if they are burned part of their body? It's also a part of architecture that you can inspire and build along. Like how to say, like I was pretty inspired from the past. Would say the Trojan. Is it the Greek, how they build the horse? Yeah, it's a kind of a inspiring element. Why not to somehow connect to animal or a human body? Yeah, so pretty
Yep.
big possibility in architecture.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
I think what Gary was discussing is also related to what Yvonne was asking a little bit about. Because this idea, for example, of indoor vertical farming was experiments done out of space living. Yvonne, I'm just going to say a question, yeah, since I know you probably can't say it. So do you see any of your projects having this sort of like reflexive action, or like you're designing and adapting it for implementation on Earth? Or do you see some sort of like conversation happening even like between space and Earth? Because we kind of live in the same solar system.
Yeah,
things like that.
I understand. Yeah, thank you for the nice question. For me, if you are designing in outer space or on Mars, you learn how to live in a zero waste environment. So it's actually can be reused. All the knowledge is developed in outer space can be reused on Earth somehow. If you, let's say, if you see the technology of a computer itself is or refrigerator. How do we pack our food in this little plastic? It's actually inspired from space travel in 1975. How they somehow think about this, and then how astronauts can store their food in that moment. So actually, this knowledge somehow NASA contribute back to the society. It's a somehow related along the way. So as your question, yeah, if we learn how to live in an extreme environment, how do we build such a constricted material where somewhere is not rich with material? So somehow inspire the earth. How do we do that? It's the same way to, yeah.
Right, especially in this day and age where climate change and things like that is like such a force that we should really reckon with. But I don't think that we can solve it so simply. I think it's also this idea of supporting systems with one another. Yvonne says, thank you for answering.
I wonder because you mentioned earlier there's a real-life simulation site, the High Sea mission, whereby the simulation is done at the volcanic area in Hawaii, whereby you will build a shelter similar to the one you're going to build in Mars. How accurate is that? I mean, in the sense that you have shown a lot of data saying that it's radiation, there's pressures problem, and there's also humidity, water absorptions, and gravity, most importantly. And how is that accurately compared to the site in Hawaii, though?
Nice question. Actually, to be honest, Earth is always there's an atmosphere, so we can't really compare 100% with the atmosphere on Mars.
Okay.
So there's a pros and cons. But what we can learn from the High Seas mission is the geology itself. So the materials is really similar. Somehow the soil, the material on the ground is somehow similar to on Mars. So there's some percentage is similar, some percentage is not. So atmosphere itself is and gravity. No, you cannot
Simulate
rely
it
on the
on
structure.
Earth.
Yeah.
I
So
see.
what they're really studying is the schedule and human psychology in such a compact space. So this is pretty interesting to also related to human psychology, not just architecture. So how do we form architecture that could provide a healthy psychological element for the people to live in? So it's a pretty tricky in this point. But I was privileged to have Angelo, Dr. Angelo, to help me along since he's the commander. He's understanding each crew member's needs. Yeah, not easy.
Thank you. Because like you mentioned, there's so many things that's uncertain of. Then that's why sorry about my technical question. It's just trying to put together. It must be a real challenge and fun challenge for you, because if you propose like a Buckminster geodesic dome, and then given you're going, the geodesic dome is a knowledge that we learned in the current context, but we don't know how it's going to work on Mars, right? Without the gravity, will the joint still work? Will there be any tolerance? Will it still break? There's so much uncertainty.
Yeah, a lot of experiment we have to do right now in the University of TU Delft somehow. So we are working on this. What I'm showing is just a nice dessert, I would say. So there's a lot of cooking materials we still need to work on. Yeah.
So for those who are interested, they can read up some of the updates in TU Delft, is it? To know more about it?
Yeah, somehow. Recently, I'm still working on a project with Professor Henrietta Beer. We actually won the pitch last year. So we are working along with European Space Agency. So we are doing some inflatable structure underground. So yeah, we are working on it somehow. Also with the integration of robotic production, as you see, the matrix of an inflatable structure is not just it's not so easy as I say in Buckminster Fuller, but if you want to relate tensile structure, it's a way beyond that. So you actually have to design a micro, you actually have to relate a micro technologies in that sense to actually make the material stronger. Yeah. So it's not just architecture. So I work with a lot of different professions.
Thank you for answering, Doris.
No problem.
Yeah. I think we have a last question from Nicholas, is it? Because I don't know what manga you're reading. Yes, Nicholas, you want to unmute yourself?
My manga.
There will be a light-hearted question to end this section.
Trying to crack Aris's brain. How do I become Aris?
No problem. I actually inspired a lot from Gundam Wing.
Gundam.
Yeah, they are illustrations from the 70s or 80s. And Studio Ghibli, of course, a lot of inspiration from the Nausicaa city, and some other. Let me think. I also like One Piece. That's a bit crazy artistic manga. But yeah, technology. Yeah, actually, Ghost in the Shell is one of my main inspiration. You can see, I can see the really influence.
Ghost in the Shell is nice.
Ghost in the Shell and Akira.
Akira Black. Yeah.
I hope Michael know what we are talking. It's pretty Asian thing.
Michael, you have anything to add on? Aris is requested by the student. Yeah.
I think you should. Sorry. Because of Michael, I saw Michael's illustration is so beautiful. It reminds me of some illustration from the Japanese artwork. So you might take a look in that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we have a lot. Yeah, Akira has actually just been on the cinemas here because it's one of the anniversaries. But yeah, my colleague Darren, who is who I did a lot of my building practice with, is very much into manga and anime, and he has a huge collection. But he's writing his PhD in a comic book form, so
wow.
Yeah, It's
Gonna be crazy.
very current.
Great. I was wondering if any of the students had any last questions, because Aris was actually requested from the students here. But if you guys don't, that's okay too.
Yankee.
Last time to call you.
You can
Yeah,
unmute
man.
yourself and just ask your question. You don't have to type it out.
Or Jia.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, give it the thumbs up.
Thank you.
All
Don't
right.
be shy. It's just a chit chat session.
Yeah,
don't be
man.
That's what you were expecting, young kid?
Wait, Kaka's here.
Hi.
Hi, hello. Hi, Aries.
Hi.
Isn't that Studio Ghibli background?
Yeah,
That's yeah. Okay.
yeah.
You have any question?
I'm wondering about the questions also asked by Queenie, that the educations and the career path, and yeah, how is, what's your decisions after the architecture study over the Germany? Yeah.
Oh, Germany is a tough country. So it's also somehow is related to politics. Somehow also it's a tough country to live in. So I must study German right now. So I know a little bit German. So it's not easy for me to somehow get out from Germany because I'm not an EU citizen. So my choice of work is, or my choice of profession is just architect. So in my choice, after I graduate in Germany, in my visa is only stating I can only be an architect. So somehow I was a architect major in German, Cologne right now. But I was also in a side dish. I also my main dream is to be a space architect, I would say, honestly. So I'm still working on it. So I was privileged to be invited by TU Delft to be part of that. Yeah. So it's a chance. So also do great work in your master thesis. Just don't look down on master thesis. So it could bring a broad kind of gateway to your future. Yeah.
Nice.
Great ending.
Very inspiring. I feel like you're in the right place at the moment, because I feel EU, US, they're at the forefront of developing space architecture as compared to, I mean, what we understand that's here. So yeah, thank you all. That marks the end of our today 18th session, unless anyone has anything else to add.
To take a picture, Joyee, we forgot last time.
Yeah, we should take a picture. Well, it's only a handful left right now, but it's okay. Turn on your camera if you want to. We're gonna take a Zoom fee, and then thank you again. Thank you so much to Aris, and thank you to Professor Michael for sharing with us today. We have a great time. I hope you have a great time as well. Okay, so ready? We're gonna take a photo in 3, 2, 1. Smile. Okay, thank you guys. Good night. And good morning to wherever different country. Bye-bye.
Thank you.